They said she was too small, too weak, too fragile for the battlefield. The drill sergeants looked at her 5'2" frame and 110-pound build and shook their heads. "You'll never make it through basic training," they told her. "The military isn't for girls like you." But what they didn't know, what they couldn't see, was the fire burning inside Private Sarah Chen. A fire that would one day save lives and rewrite the definition of strength itself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. This is the story of how a woman deemed too weak to carry a standard-issue rifle would end up carrying a 200-pound wounded soldier 3 miles through enemy territory, defying every expectation, every stereotype, and every limit that had ever been placed on her. It's a story that will challenge everything you think you know about courage, determination, and what it truly means to be strong. Sarah Chen grew up in a small town in Oregon, the daughter of immigrant parents who had sacrificed everything to give their children a better life. Her father worked double shifts at a manufacturing plant, while her mother cleaned office buildings at night to make ends meet. Sarah was the youngest of 3 children, and from an early age, she learned that in her family, you didn't give up. You didn't make excuses. You found a way. But finding a way wasn't always easy for Sarah. In high school, she was consistently overlooked for sports teams, told she was too small for basketball, too light for track and field, and too weak for any activity that required physical strength. Her guidance counselor suggested she focus on academics, perhaps consider becoming a librarian or a teacher, safe, quiet professions that seemed to match her petite stature. Sarah had different plans. She had always been fascinated by the military, inspired by stories of courage and sacrifice she'd heard from her grandfather, who had served in Vietnam. She would spend hours reading military history, studying tactics, and dreaming of the day she could serve her country. When she announced her intention to enlist in the Army, the reaction was swift and unanimous. Everyone told her she was making a mistake. "You're too small," her high school friends said. "You'll never survive boot camp," warned her older brother. Even her parents, who had always supported her dreams, expressed concern. "Maybe you should consider the Air Force," her mother suggested gently. "It's less physical." But Sarah had made up her mind. She wanted to be a soldier, not a desk jockey. The day she walked into the recruitment office, the sergeant behind the desk looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. "You sure about this, sweetheart?" he asked, his tone suggesting he hoped she wasn't. "The Army's gotten tougher lately. Physical standards are higher than ever." Sarah straightened her shoulders and met his gaze. "I'm sure," she said firmly. "I want to serve my country." What followed was 8 weeks of the most grueling training Sarah had ever experienced. Fort Benning's basic training was designed to break down civilians and rebuild them as soldiers, and the drill sergeant seemed particularly interested in breaking down Sarah. "Shun!" they would shout. "You're holding back the entire platoon. Maybe you should have joined the Girl Scouts instead." Every morning brought new challenges that seemed designed to highlight her physical limitations. While her male counterparts effortlessly hoisted heavy packs and weapons, Sarah struggled with equipment that often weighed nearly as much as she did. The standard M16 rifle felt awkward and unwieldy in her small hands. During marching drills, she had to take 2 steps for every one of her taller squad mates. In combat training, she was repeatedly knocked down, overpowered, and told she was too weak to be effective in a real fight. But Sarah had something her critics didn't account for: an unbreakable spirit. Every time she was knocked down, she got back up. Every time she failed a test, she trained harder. Every time someone told her she couldn't do something, she found a way to prove them wrong. She might not have been the strongest or the fastest, but she was absolutely the most determined. Her breakthrough came during a particularly brutal training exercise. The platoon was tasked with a 20-mile march carrying full gear, and Sarah was struggling to keep up. Her feet were blistered, her back ached, and her rifle felt heavier with each step. Some of the other recruits were beginning to mutter about her slowing them down, and Sarah could see the doubt in their eyes. That's when she noticed Private Johnson, a large man who had been one of her harshest critics, beginning to stumble. He was dehydrated and exhausted, his face pale and his breathing labored. While others walked past him, Sarah stopped. Without hesitation, she helped him drink from her own water supply, redistributed some of his gear among willing squad mates, and stayed by his side for the remainder of the march, encouraging him every step of the way. That night, Johnson approached her with tears in his eyes. "I was wrong about you, Chun," he said quietly. "You might be small, but you've got the biggest heart in this whole platoon." Word of her selfless act spread quickly through the unit, and slowly the attitude toward Sarah began to change. Her fellow soldiers started to see past her physical limitations and recognize her true strength, her unwavering compassion, her tactical intelligence, and her absolute refusal to abandon a fellow soldier. By graduation day, Sarah Chen had not only survived basic training, she had excelled. She finished in the top 10% of her class, earned the respect of her peers and instructors, and was selected for advanced combat training. But more importantly, she had proven to herself that strength wasn't just about physical power. It was about heart, determination, and the willingness to push beyond what others believed was possible. After basic training, Sarah was assigned to the 10th Mountain Division, a unit known for its rigorous training and deployment to some of the world's most challenging terrains. The 10th Mountain Division had a legendary reputation. They were the soldiers who fought in the mountains of Afghanistan, the dense jungles of Central America, and the harsh deserts of Iraq. These were elite warriors, and Sarah was about to become one of them. Her first assignment was to Fort Drum in New York, where she would undergo specialized mountain warfare training. The base was a sprawling complex of buildings and training facilities, home to thousands of soldiers who were among the Army's best. As Sarah walked through the gates for the first time, duffel bags slung over her shoulder, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of pride and apprehension. The mountain warfare training was unlike anything she had experienced in basic training. The soldiers learned to navigate treacherous terrain, survive in extreme weather conditions, and fight effectively at high altitudes where the air was thin and every breath was precious. They trained with specialized equipment, learned advanced climbing techniques, and practiced combat scenarios that would prepare them for the unique challenges of mountain warfare. Sarah's small stature, which had been seen as a liability in basic training, actually proved to be an advantage in mountain warfare. Her light frame allowed her to move quickly across rocky terrain. Her low center of gravity made her more stable on steep inclines, and her natural agility helped her navigate narrow ledges and treacherous paths that larger soldiers found challenging. For the first time in her military career, Sarah felt like she had found her niche. Her squad leader was Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, a 15-year veteran who had served multiple tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. Rodriguez was a soldier's soldier, tough, experienced, and absolutely dedicated to his men. He was also initially skeptical of Sarah's assignment to his squad. "I've got nothing against women in combat," he told his platoon sergeant privately. "But this one looks like she should be in high school, not carrying a rifle in the mountains." But Rodriguez was also a fair man who believed in giving everyone a chance to prove themselves. He watched Sarah carefully during training exercises, noting her attention to detail, her quick learning ability, and her natural leadership qualities. She might not have been the strongest soldier in the squad, but she was definitely one of the smartest and most dedicated. Sarah's squad mates were a diverse group of soldiers, each bringing their own strengths and experiences to the unit. There was Corporal David Kim, a former college football player whose size and strength made him the squad's designated heavy weapons specialist. Private First Class Miguel Santos was a quiet young man from Texas who had an uncanny ability to read terrain and navigate even in the worst conditions. Specialist Jason Turner was the squad's medic, a calm and competent soldier who could perform life-saving procedures under the most stressful circumstances. The squad trained together for months, building the trust and cohesion that would be essential in combat. They practiced everything from basic marksmanship to complex tactical maneuvers, from survival techniques to advanced medical procedures. Sarah threw herself into the training with characteristic determination, often staying after hours to practice. Skills she found challenging and studying tactical manuals late into the night. One particularly challenging exercise involved a week-long survival training course in the Adirondack Mountains. The squad was dropped off in a remote location with minimal supplies and tasked with navigating to a series of checkpoints while evading enemy forces played by other soldiers. It was designed to test their endurance, their tactical skills, and their ability to work as a team under extreme stress. The weather was brutal. Temperatures dropped below freezing at night, and a constant rain made everything cold and miserable. The terrain was unforgiving, with steep mountain trails, dense forests, and rocky outcroppings that seemed designed to trip up exhausted soldiers. Food was scarce, and the squad had to carefully ration their supplies while maintaining their energy. For the demanding physical challenges ahead, Sarah's performance during this exercise was nothing short of remarkable. Her small size meant she required fewer calories to maintain her energy, allowing the squad to stretch their rations further. Her natural agility and mountain training made her an excellent point person, capable of scouting ahead and identifying potential dangers or obstacles. Most importantly, her positive attitude and unwavering determination helped keep the squad's morale high even in the most challenging conditions. On the fourth day of the exercise, the squad encountered a particularly difficult challenge. They needed to cross a river that was swollen from recent rains, with a current that was strong enough to sweep away even experienced swimmers. The designated crossing point was a series of slippery rocks that jutted out from the rushing water, requiring perfect balance and timing to navigate safely. Several squad members attempted the crossing but were forced to turn back when they lost their footing on the wet rocks. The current was too strong, and the risk of being swept downstream was too great. Rodriguez was beginning to consider alternatives when Sarah stepped forward. "Let me try, Sergeant," she said quietly. "I think I can make it." Rodriguez hesitated. Sarah was the smallest member of the squad, and if anyone was going to be swept away by the current, it would be her. But he also knew that she had consistently surprised him with her capabilities, and they were running out of options. "Be careful, Chun," he said finally. "If you start to lose your balance, get back to shore immediately." Sarah nodded and began her careful journey across the rocks. Her small size and low center of gravity gave her a significant advantage on the slippery surface. She moved slowly and deliberately, testing each step before committing her full weight to the next rock. The other squad members watched in tense silence as she made her way across the treacherous crossing, their hearts in their throats every time she slipped or stumbled. When Sarah finally reached the other side, the squad erupted in cheers. But more importantly, she had proven once again that physical strength wasn't the only measure of a soldier's value. Her courage, her intelligence, and her determination had found a way to overcome what seemed like an impossible obstacle. By the time Sarah's unit received orders for deployment to Afghanistan, she had earned the complete respect and trust of her squad mates. The transformation from the small doubted recruit to a valued member of an elite mountain warfare unit had been remarkable, but it was nothing compared to what lay ahead. Afghanistan would test every skill she had learned, every bond she had formed, and every limit she thought she had overcome. The deployment began with a 15-hour flight to Bagram Airfield, the massive U.S. military base north of Kabul. As Sarah looked out the aircraft window at the rugged, mountainous landscape below, she felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. This was what she had trained for, what she had dreamed of since childhood. She was finally going to serve her country in combat, to put her skills and courage to the ultimate test. But Bagram was a sprawling complex that housed thousands of soldiers, contractors, and support personnel. The base had everything from fast food, restaurants to a full hospital, but it was also a constant reminder that they were in a war zone. The distant sound of helicopters was constant, and the occasional boom of artillery fire reminded everyone that combat was never far away. Sarah's squad was assigned to Forward Operating Base, Fob Shank, a smaller, more isolated outpost in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. The base was home to about 800 soldiers and was responsible for patrolling a region known for its difficult terrain and active Taliban presence. The mission was clear: work with local Afghan forces to maintain security, disrupt enemy operations, and protect the local population from insurgent attacks. The mountains of Afghanistan were unlike anything Sarah had experienced, even during her extensive training. The peaks rose to heights of over 15,000 feet, with narrow valleys and steep-sided ridges that created a maze of potential ambush sites. The weather was unpredictable, with scorching heat during the day and freezing temperatures at night. The thin air at high altitudes made even simple tasks exhausting, and the rocky terrain was unforgiving to both equipment and personnel. Sarah's first patrol was a routine mission to visit a small village about 10 miles from the base. The purpose was to meet with local leaders, assess the security situation, and gather intelligence about enemy activities in the area. It was exactly the kind of mission that the 10th Mountain Division specialized in, moving through difficult terrain to maintain a presence in remote areas where the enemy might otherwise operate freely. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez led the patrol, with Sarah serving as the radio operator, a position that required her to maintain constant communication with the base and coordinate with other units in the area. The responsibility was significant. In the event of an emergency, Sarah would be the squad's lifeline to reinforcements, medical evacuation, and fire support. The patrol moved out before dawn, using the cover of darkness to avoid detection by enemy forces who might be watching the base. Sarah had painted her face with camouflage makeup and wore full combat gear, including body armor, helmet, and the M4 carbine that had replaced the heavier M16 rifle. The total weight of her equipment was nearly 70 pounds, more than half her body weight, but months of training had conditioned her to carry the load efficiently. As they moved through the mountains, Sarah marveled at the stark beauty of the landscape. The peaks were magnificent, reaching toward a sky that seemed impossibly blue and clear. But she also remained acutely aware of the dangers that surrounded them. Every rock formation could hide an enemy sniper, every narrow pass could be the site of an ambush, and every step could trigger an improvised explosive device buried in the trail. The village they were visiting was a collection of mud brick buildings, clustered around a small stream. The local population was friendly but cautious, clearly caught between their desire to cooperate with coalition forces and their fear of Taliban reprisals. Sarah watched as Rodriguez conducted his meeting with the village elder, a dignified old man who spoke in careful, measured tones about the challenges his community faced. During the meeting, Sarah monitored the radio frequencies and maintained watch for any signs of enemy activity. Her training had taught her to be constantly alert, to scan the surrounding hills for movement, and to listen for the subtle sounds that might indicate an approaching threat. The mountains were eerily quiet, with only the distant sound of wind and the occasional call of a bird breaking the silence. The patrol spent several hours in the village, gathering information and building relationships with the local population. Sarah was struck by the resilience of the people they met, farmers and shopkeepers, who continued their daily lives despite the constant threat of violence. Children played in the streets, women tended to their households, and men worked in the fields, all while living in a war zone where safety was never guaranteed. As the patrol prepared to return to base, Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment. The mission had been successful, with valuable intelligence gathered and important relationships strengthened. But she also felt the weight of responsibility that came with serving in a combat zone. These weren't training exercises anymore. The decisions she made, the actions she took, could have life or death consequences for her squad mates and for the people they were trying to protect. The return journey to Fob Shank was uneventful, but Sarah remained alert throughout the trek. She had learned that complacency was the enemy of survival, and that even routine missions could turn dangerous in an instant. As they approached the base perimeter, she felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. Relief that they had completed their first mission safely, and anticipation for the challenges that lay ahead. That night, as Sarah cleaned her equipment and prepared for the next day's assignments, she reflected on how far she had come. From the small-town girl who had been told she was too weak for military service to a combat soldier serving in one of the world's most dangerous regions, her journey had been remarkable. But she also knew that her greatest challenges were still ahead, and that Afghanistan would test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. 3 months into her deployment, Sarah had settled into the rhythm of life at FOB Shank. The days were filled with patrols, training exercises, and the constant vigilance required of soldiers in a combat zone. She had participated in dozens of missions, from routine village visits to complex operations targeting Taliban leadership. With each mission, her confidence grew, and her reputation as a reliable, skilled soldier was firmly established. The relationship between Sarah and her squad had evolved into something deeper than professional respect. They had become a family. Corporal Kim had taken to calling her little sister, while Private Santas often sought her advice on personal matters. Specialist Turner had taught her advanced first aid techniques, recognizing her quick learning ability and steady hands under pressure. Most importantly, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had come to rely on her tactical insights and her ability to remain calm in stressful situations. Rodriguez himself had undergone a transformation in his attitude toward Sarah, the skeptical squad leader, who had questioned her assignment to his unit, had become her strongest advocate. He had recommended her for promotion and had begun including her in planning sessions typically reserved for senior soldiers. "Chun's got something special," he told his platoon sergeant. "She sees things others miss, and she's got the kind of courage you can't teach." The squad's effectiveness had improved dramatically since Sarah's arrival. Her small size allowed her to move through terrain that would challenge larger soldiers, making her an ideal scout and reconnaissance specialist. Her attention to detail had helped the squad avoid several potential ambushes, and her ability to connect with local civilians had provided valuable intelligence about enemy activities in the region. But Afghanistan was an unpredictable place, where calm periods could be shattered in an instant by violence and chaos. The enemy was adaptive, constantly changing tactics and finding new ways to attack coalition forces. Improvised explosive devices were becoming more sophisticated, ambushes more carefully planned, and the local population more fearful of cooperating with American forces. Sarah's first real taste of combat came during a mission to investigate reports of Taliban fighters gathering in a remote valley. The intelligence suggested that a significant enemy force was planning an attack on a nearby Afghan police station, and the squad was tasked with confirming the threat and disrupting any planned operations. The mission began like dozens of others, an early morning departure, a carefully planned route through the mountains, and coordination with other units in the area. Sarah carried her usual equipment load, including the radio that kept the squad connected to headquarters, and the specialized gear needed for reconnaissance operations. The weather was clear, and the terrain was challenging but manageable. As they moved deeper into the valley, Sarah began to notice subtle signs that suggested enemy activity. Footprints in the dust that seemed too fresh to be from local villagers, disturbed vegetation that indicated the passage of armed men, and the complete absence of civilian activity in an area that should have been bustling with farmers and herders. She reported her observations to Rodriguez, who made the decision to proceed with increased caution. The ambush came without warning. One moment the squad was moving along a narrow trail, and the next they were under intense fire from multiple directions. The distinctive crack of AK-47 rifles echoed off the canyon walls, and the snap of bullets passing overhead sent the soldiers diving for cover behind rocks and fallen trees. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She found cover, returned fire, and began calling for support on the radio. The firefight was intense but brief. The enemy had chosen their position well, with clear fields of fire and multiple escape routes. But they had underestimated the training and experience of Rodriguez's squad. Within minutes, the soldiers had identified the enemy positions, coordinated their fire, and begun a tactical withdrawal that would allow them to break contact and call in air support. Sarah's performance during the firefight was exemplary. She maintained radio contact with headquarters throughout the engagement, providing accurate reports on enemy positions and casualties. Her small size made her a difficult target, and her accuracy with the M4 carbine was impressive. Most importantly, she remained calm and focused, helping to coordinate the squad's movements and ensuring that no one was left behind. When the shooting stopped, the squad had successfully broken contact with the enemy and reached a secure position, where they could call in helicopter support. There were no friendly casualties, and intelligence indicated that they had inflicted significant damage on the enemy force. The mission was considered a success, and Sarah's role in the engagement was noted in the official report. But combat in Afghanistan was never just about firefights and tactical victories. The real challenge was the constant stress of living in an environment where danger could emerge at any moment. Sarah learned to sleep through the sound of incoming artillery, to eat meals while scanning the horizon for threats, and to maintain her equipment in conditions that would challenge even the most dedicated soldier. The psychological toll of combat was something that no amount of training could fully prepare her for. She had seen the aftermath of Taliban attacks on local civilians, witnessed the fear in the eyes of Afghan children, and experienced the frustration of fighting an enemy that seemed to blend seamlessly into the local population. There were nights when she lay awake thinking about home, wondering if her family truly understood what she was experiencing, and questioning whether the sacrifices being made were worth the price. During one particularly difficult period, Sarah received news that a friend from basic training had been killed in action in Iraq. The loss hit her hard, forcing her to confront the reality that she might not survive her deployment. She spent hours writing letters to her family, trying to put into words what her service meant to her and what she hoped to accomplish in Afghanistan. Rodriguez noticed the change in Sarah's demeanor and took her aside for a private conversation. "I've seen a lot of good soldiers struggle with the realities of combat," he told her. "The trick is to focus on what you can control: your training, your equipment, your squad mates. The rest is just noise." His words were simple but profound, and they helped Sarah find her emotional center again. As winter approached, the pace of operations increased. The enemy was trying to take advantage of the harsh weather conditions to launch attacks on coalition forces, and the squad found themselves on patrol almost daily. The cold was brutal, with temperatures dropping well below freezing and snow making the mountain trails treacherous. Sarah's equipment felt heavier in the cold, and every movement required extra effort in the thin, frigid air, but she had also never felt more connected to her purpose. Every mission brought new challenges and new opportunities to prove herself. Every successful patrol was a victory, not just for the squad, but for the ideals of service and sacrifice that had brought her to Afghanistan in the first place. She was no longer the small recruit who had been told she was too weak for military service. She was a combat veteran, a trusted member of an elite unit, and a soldier who had earned her place through courage and determination. The winter of 2019 brought unprecedented challenges to the soldiers stationed at Phob Shank. The mountains of eastern Afghanistan were covered in several feet of snow, and the temperatures regularly dropped to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Supply convoys struggled to reach the base, and helicopter flights were frequently canceled due to weather conditions. The soldiers had to adapt to a harsh environment that tested not only their physical endurance, but also their mental resilience. Sarah had developed a reputation as one of the most dependable soldiers in the unit. Her ability to navigate difficult terrain, her skill with radio communications, and her unwavering determination had made her invaluable to the squad. Rodriguez had begun assigning her increasingly complex responsibilities, including serving as the assistant team leader on several missions. For a soldier who had been in combat for less than a year, this level of trust was extraordinary. The bond between Sarah and Rodriguez had deepened beyond the typical relationship between squad leader and soldier. He had become something of a mentor to her, sharing his knowledge of tactics, his understanding of the local culture, and his hard-earned wisdom about surviving in a combat zone. Sarah, in turn, had proven herself to be a quick learner who could be trusted with sensitive information and complex tasks. "Chun's got the makings of a great leader," Rodriguez told his platoon sergeant during a performance review. "She's got the tactical sense, the physical courage, and the respect of her peers. More importantly, she's got the kind of integrity that makes soldiers want to follow her." The platoon sergeant agreed, noting that Sarah's promotion to corporal was being fast-tracked based on her exceptional performance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The mission that would change everything began with what seemed like routine intelligence. Afghan National Army forces had reported suspicious activity in a valley about 15 miles from the base. Local villagers had seen armed men moving through the area at night, and there were reports of weapons being cached in the mountains. The mission was to investigate these reports, gather intelligence, and disrupt any enemy operations in the region. Rodriguez's squad was chosen to lead the mission because of their experience with mountain operations and their proven ability to operate independently in hostile territory. The plan was straightforward: move to the target area under cover of darkness, conduct a thorough reconnaissance, and report back to headquarters with their findings. If they encountered enemy forces, they were authorized to engage, but the primary objective was intelligence gathering. Sarah prepared for the mission with her usual attention to detail. She checked and rechecked her equipment, studied the terrain maps, and reviewed the communication protocols. As the squad's radio operator, she would be responsible for maintaining contact with headquarters and coordinating with other units in Cody. The area, the responsibility was significant, and she took it seriously. The squad departed Phob Shank at 0300 hours, moving through the darkness with night vision goggles and years of training guiding their steps. The route to the target area was challenging, involving a steep climb through rocky terrain and several stream crossings. The temperature was well below freezing, and the snow made every step treacherous. Sarah's breath created clouds of vapor that could potentially give away their position, so she had to be careful to control her breathing and movement. As they moved deeper into the mountains, Sarah began to notice signs that suggested the intelligence reports were accurate. There were footprints in the snow that seemed too fresh to be from local villagers, and she spotted several locations where the natural camouflage had been disturbed in ways that suggested human activity. She reported these observations to Rodriguez, who made the decision to proceed with increased caution. The first indication of enemy contact came from Santos, who was serving as the squad's point man. He had spotted movement in the rocks ahead and could see what appeared to be a sentry position overlooking the trail. Rodriguez made the decision to bypass the position and continue toward the primary objective, but the presence of enemy forces confirmed that they were in the right area. As they approached the target valley, the squad could see clear evidence of enemy activity. There were several buildings that appeared to be occupied, with smoke rising from chimneys and the faint glow of lights visible through windows. More importantly, they could see armed men moving between the buildings, and there were vehicles parked in locations that suggested they were being used to transport weapons or supplies. Sarah established a hidden observation post on a ridge overlooking the valley and began documenting everything she could see. Her training had taught her to be thorough and accurate in her reporting, and she carefully noted the number of enemy personnel, their weapons, and their activities. The intelligence she gathered would be crucial for planning future operations against this enemy stronghold. The squad spent several hours in the observation post, gathering intelligence and calling in periodic reports to headquarters. Sarah's radio work was flawless, maintaining clear communication despite the difficult terrain and harsh weather conditions. She coordinated with other units in the area, ensuring that everyone was aware of the enemy presence and the potential for contact. As dawn approached, Rodriguez made the decision to begin their withdrawal. They had gathered valuable intelligence, confirmed the enemy presence in the area, and avoided detection. The mission was a success, and they could return to base with important information for planning future operations. But as they began to move away from the observation post, the tactical situation suddenly changed. An enemy patrol had apparently spotted their position and was moving to intercept them. The squad found themselves in a race against time, trying to reach a defensive position before they could be surrounded by superior enemy forces. Sarah's performance during the withdrawal was exceptional. She maintained radio contact with headquarters, providing updates on their position and the enemy threat. Her small size allowed her to move quickly through the rocky terrain, and her endurance was impressive despite the heavy load she was carrying. Most importantly, she remained calm and focused, helping to coordinate the squad's movements as they fought to stay ahead of their pursuers. The chase continued for several hours, with the squad using their superior training and equipment to maintain their advantage over the enemy forces. They moved through terrain that would have been impossible for larger, less experienced soldiers, and they used their knowledge of mountain warfare tactics to avoid several potential ambush sites. The pursuit through the Afghan mountains had been going on for over 4 hours when Rodriguez made the decision that would change everything. The enemy forces had proven to be more persistent and better organized than initially expected, and the squad was beginning to show signs of exhaustion. The thin mountain air, combined with the physical demands of carrying heavy equipment through difficult terrain, was taking its toll on even the most experienced soldiers. Sarah had been monitoring the radio traffic and could tell that the situation was becoming increasingly serious. Additional enemy forces were being brought into the area, and the squad's routes back to Phobshank were being systematically blocked. They were facing the possibility of being surrounded by a much larger enemy force, a scenario that could quickly become deadly for the small American unit. Rodriguez called a halt in a small depression surrounded by large boulders that provided some cover from observation. The squad needed to rest, reassess their situation, and develop a new plan for reaching safety. As they caught their breath, Rodriguez studied his map and considered their options. The direct route back to base was no longer viable, and they would need to find an alternative path through the mountains. "Chun, what's the status on air support?" Rodriguez asked, his voice showing the strain of the long pursuit. Sarah had been in constant communication with headquarters, requesting helicopter support and close air support aircraft, but the weather conditions were making flight operations extremely dangerous. The mountain peaks were shrouded in clouds, and the wind was gusting to over 40 miles per hour. "Negative on the helicopters, Sergeant," Sarah reported. "Weather's too bad for extraction. They're trying to get a drone overhead for surveillance, but even that's questionable with these conditions." The news was disappointing but not unexpected. The squad would have to rely on their own resources to get out of this situation. Rodriguez made the decision to move toward an alternate extraction point about 8 miles away. The route would take them through some of the most challenging terrain in the region, but it was their best hope of avoiding the enemy forces that were closing in on their position. The squad would have to move quickly and quietly, using their training and experience to stay ahead of their pursuers. As they prepared to move out, Sarah noticed that Rodriguez was favoring his left leg. When she asked about it, he dismissed her concern with a wave of his hand. "Just a twisted ankle," he said. "Nothing I can't handle." But Sarah could see that he was in more pain than he was letting on, and she made a mental note to keep an eye on him as they continued their movement. The new route took them along a narrow ridge that offered good concealment but required careful navigation. The path was barely wide enough for one person, and a single misstep could result in a fatal fall down the steep mountainside. Sarah moved with the confidence of someone who had spent months training in similar terrain, but she could see that some of her squad mates were struggling with the exposure and the technical difficulty of the route. About 2 hours into the movement, disaster struck. As Rodriguez was negotiating a particularly difficult section of the trail, his injured leg gave out. He lost his balance and fell, landing hard on his right side and crying out in pain. When the squad reached him, it was immediately clear that he was seriously injured. His right leg was bent at an unnatural angle, and there was blood seeping through his uniform. Turner, the squad medic, quickly assessed Rodriguez's condition. The diagnosis was grim. Rodriguez had suffered a compound fracture of his femur, and there was significant damage to the surrounding tissue. The injury was life-threatening, and Rodriguez would need immediate medical attention to survive. More importantly, he would be unable to walk, let alone continue the difficult movement through the mountains. The tactical situation had suddenly become a nightmare. The squad was being pursued by enemy forces. They were miles from safety, and their leader was critically injured. The terrain made helicopter evacuation impossible, and carrying a wounded soldier through the mountains seemed like an insurmountable challenge. Rodriguez, despite his obvious pain, tried to take charge of the situation. "Leave me here," he said through gritted teeth. "Take the radio and the encryption codes and get back to base. I'll try to hold them off as long as I can." It was the kind of selfless sacrifice that defined Rodriguez's character, but it was also completely unacceptable to the soldiers who had served under his leadership for months. "We're not leaving you, Sergeant," Kim said firmly, echoing the sentiment of the entire squad. "We came here together, and we're going home together." But the reality of their situation was undeniable. Rodriguez weighed nearly 200 pounds, and carrying him through miles of difficult mountain terrain would be extremely challenging for even the strongest soldiers. Sarah studied the situation with the tactical mind that had earned Rodriguez's respect. The enemy forces were perhaps an hour behind them. The weather was deteriorating, and they had limited options for evacuation. But she also knew that leaving Rodriguez behind was not an option, not for the squad, and not for the values that had brought them all to Afghanistan in the first place. "We can do this," she said quietly, her voice carrying a conviction that surprised even her. "We can carry him out of here." The other soldiers looked at her with a mixture of hope and skepticism. Sarah was the smallest member of the squad, and the idea that she could contribute significantly to carrying a wounded soldier seemed questionable at best, but Sarah had already begun formulating a plan. She had studied the terrain maps extensively and knew there was a gentler route that would take them toward the alternate extraction point. It would be longer and more exposed, but it would be manageable for a squad carrying a wounded soldier. More importantly, she had an idea about how to distribute the load in a way that would make the carry feasible. Turner worked quickly to stabilize Rodriguez's leg, using splints and medical supplies to immobilize the fracture and control the bleeding. The treatment was painful, but Rodriguez endured it with the stoic determination that had made him a respected leader. As Turner worked, Sarah began organizing the carry operation with the efficiency of a seasoned leader. The squad would take turns carrying Rodriguez, with 2 soldiers at a time supporting his weight, while the others provided security and carried the extra equipment. Sarah would coordinate the movement, navigate the route, and maintain radio contact with headquarters. It was a complex operation that would require perfect coordination and tremendous physical endurance from every member of the squad. As they prepared to begin the evacuation, Sarah made a decision that would define her military career. She volunteered to take the first carry position, partnering with Kim to support Rodriguez's weight. The other soldiers initially protested, pointing out that she was too small to be effective in such a demanding role. But Sarah was insistent, and her determination was absolute. "Trust me," she told her squad mates, "I can do this." And for the first time in months, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that she was right. Sarah Chen, the soldier who had been told she was too weak to carry a rifle, was about to prove that strength came in many forms, and that courage could overcome any obstacle. The evacuation began with Sarah and Kim lifting Rodriguez from the ground and beginning the long journey toward safety. Sarah's small frame was perfectly suited for the task. She could get close to Rodriguez's body and use her legs and core strength to support his weight, while Kim provided the additional lift needed to keep him stable. The system worked better than anyone had expected, and they were able to move at a steady pace despite the challenging terrain. As they moved through the mountains, Sarah's true character began to shine. She encouraged Rodriguez when he was in pain, coordinated with the other squad members to ensure smooth transitions, and navigated the difficult terrain with the confidence of someone who had spent her entire military career proving that she belonged. Her performance was nothing short of extraordinary, and it was about to become legendary. The first mile of the evacuation was the hardest. Sarah and Kim had to navigate a treacherous section of the trail while carrying Rodriguez's full weight, and the physical demands were enormous. Sarah's muscles burned with the effort, and sweat poured down her face despite the freezing temperatures. But she refused to show any sign of weakness, knowing that the squad's morale depended on her strength and determination. Rodriguez, despite his severe injury and obvious pain, tried to help as much as possible. He used his arms to support some of his weight when the terrain allowed, and he provided tactical guidance about the route and potential enemy positions. But it was clear that he was losing blood and strength, and Turner was becoming increasingly concerned about his condition. "We need to move faster," Turner said during one of their brief rest stops. "He's going into shock and we're losing him." The words sent a chill through the squad that had nothing to do with the mountain cold. Rodriguez had been their leader, their mentor, and their friend. The thought of losing him was unbearable, and it motivated them to push harder than they had ever pushed before. Sarah took charge of the situation with a confidence that surprised even her. She redistributed the squad's equipment to make the carry more efficient, assigned specific roles to each soldier, and established a rhythm that would allow them to maintain their pace while conserving energy. Her leadership was natural and intuitive, and the other soldiers responded to her commands without question. As they moved into the second mile, the terrain began to change. The narrow mountain trail gave way to a more open valley, which provided easier movement but also greater exposure to enemy observation. Sarah had to balance the need for speed with the requirement for tactical security, and she made the decision to take a more circuitous route that would keep them in the shadows of the valley walls. The carry system that Sarah had developed was working better than anyone had expected. By rotating the carriers every 15 minutes and using a specific technique for supporting Rodriguez's weight, they were able to maintain a steady pace without exhausting any individual soldier. Sarah's small size was actually an advantage in this situation. She could get close to Rodriguez's body and use her core strength to support his weight, while the larger soldiers provided the additional lift, needed to keep him stable, but the physical demands were taking their toll on everyone. Kim was struggling with the altitude and the cold. Santos was dealing with blisters that had developed during the long pursuit. And Turner was trying to monitor Rodriguez's condition while also carrying extra medical supplies. Only Sarah seemed to be maintaining her strength and endurance, drawing on reserves of determination that seemed inexhaustible. As they approached the halfway point of their journey, Sarah noticed that Rodriguez's condition was deteriorating. His breathing was becoming shallow, his skin was pale and clammy, and he was having difficulty staying conscious. Turner confirmed her fears. Rodriguez was going into hypovolemic shock from blood loss, and they were running out of time. "We need to call for emergency extraction," Turner said. "If we don't get him to a hospital soon, he's not going to make it." Sarah immediately got on the radio, but the response from headquarters was disappointing. The weather conditions were still too dangerous for helicopter operations, and the nearest ground evacuation point was still several miles away. The squad was facing a crisis that tested every aspect of their training and character. They could continue with the evacuation, knowing that Rodriguez might not survive the journey, or they could try to establish a defensive position and hope that the weather cleared enough for helicopter extraction. Either choice carried significant risks, and there was no guarantee of success. Sarah made the decision that would define her military career. "We're going to carry him all the way," she said firmly. "We're going to get him to that extraction point, and we're going to save his life." The other soldiers looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. They knew that she was committing them to an incredibly difficult task, but they also knew that she was right. The third mile was a test of endurance that pushed every member of the squad to their limits. Sarah had taken over as the primary carrier, partnering with different soldiers as they rotated through the system. Her small frame was perfectly suited for the task, and her determination was absolute. She carried Rodriguez through sections of the trail that would have been challenging for a single soldier, let alone someone carrying a wounded man. As they moved through the valley, Sarah began to notice signs that the enemy forces were still pursuing them. There were fresh footprints in the snow, and she could occasionally hear the distant sound of voices carried on the wind. The tactical situation was becoming increasingly dangerous, and she knew that they might have to fight their way to the extraction point. But Sarah also knew that they had come too far to give up now. Rodriguez was still alive, though barely conscious, and they were making good progress toward their destination. She had proven to herself and to her squad mates that she was capable of extraordinary things, and she was determined to see this mission through to completion. The terrain began to change again as they approached the final section of their journey. The valley narrowed into a steep-sided canyon that would provide good cover, but also create potential choke points where they could be trapped by enemy forces. Sarah studied the terrain carefully, looking for alternative routes and defensive positions that could be used if they were forced to fight. As they entered the canyon, Sarah's worst fears were realized. The sound of gunfire echoed off the rock walls, and she could see muzzle flashes in the distance. The enemy forces had somehow gotten ahead of them and were preparing to ambush the squad at the narrowest point of the canyon. The tactical situation had suddenly become desperate, and Sarah knew that they would have to fight their way through to reach the extraction point. But even in this moment of crisis, Sarah's determination never wavered. She had carried Rodriguez this far, and she was going to carry him all the way to safety. The small soldier who had been told she was too weak for military service was about to prove that true. Strength came from the heart, not from the size of one's muscles. The ambush erupted with the sudden intensity that characterized combat in Afghanistan. The canyon walls amplified the sound of gunfire, creating a deafening cacophony that made communication almost impossible. Sarah's training took over immediately. She found cover behind a large boulder while maintaining her grip on Rodriguez, who was unconscious and completely dependent on her protection. The enemy had chosen their position well. They were firing from elevated positions on both sides of the canyon, creating a deadly crossfire that would be difficult for the squad to overcome. Bullets ricocheted off the rock walls, sending fragments of stone flying in all directions. The tactical situation was desperate, and Sarah knew that they had only minutes before the enemy forces would be able to maneuver into positions that would make their situation impossible. "Turner, get Rodriguez stabilized," Sarah shouted over the gunfire. "Kim Santos, lay down suppressive fire on the ridge to our left. I'm going to try to find us a way out of here." Her voice carried the authority of command, and the other soldiers responded immediately to her orders. In the chaos of combat, Sarah Chen had become the leader of the squad, while maintaining her protective position over Rodriguez. Sarah studied the terrain with a tactical eye that had earned her Rodriguez's respect. The canyon walls were steep, but not impossible to climb, and there appeared to be a narrow ledge about 50 feet up, the right wall that could provide a route around the enemy positions. It would be an extremely dangerous climb, especially while carrying a wounded soldier, but it might be their only chance of escape. Turner worked frantically to stabilize Rodriguez's condition, using combat medical techniques to control his bleeding and maintain his blood pressure. The sergeant was unconscious but still breathing, and Turner was doing everything possible to keep him alive. "He's hanging on," Turner reported, "but we need to get him out of here fast." Sarah made a decision that would have seemed impossible. Just hours earlier, she was going to climb the canyon wall while carrying Rodriguez, using the ledge system to bypass the enemy positions and reach the extraction point. It was a plan that required incredible physical strength, technical climbing, ability, and absolute determination. For most soldiers, it would have been suicide. For Sarah Chen, it was just another obstacle to overcome. "Listen up," she called to her squad mates during a brief lull in the firing. "I'm going to take Rodriguez up the wall. Cover me until I get to that ledge, then follow when you can. Kim, you're in charge of the squad until we all get out of here." The other soldiers looked at her with expressions of disbelief and admiration. What she was proposing seemed impossible, but they had learned never to underestimate. Sarah Chen. Sarah began her climb with Rodriguez secured to her back using an improvised harness system she had created from their climbing rope and tactical gear. The additional weight of nearly 200 pounds made every movement incredibly difficult, but her small size and low center of gravity actually provided some advantages on the steep rock face. She moved slowly and deliberately, testing each handhold and foothold before committing her weight to the next position. The enemy forces quickly realized what she was attempting and began directing their fire toward her position. Bullets struck the rock face around her, but Sarah continued climbing with the focused determination that had characterized her entire military career. She could hear her squad mates returning fire below her, trying to suppress the enemy positions and give her the cover she needed to complete her impossible ascent. About halfway up the wall, Sarah's strength began to fail. The combination of Rodriguez's weight, her own exhaustion, and the physical demands of technical climbing was pushing her beyond her limits. Her arms trembled with the effort, and she could feel her grip beginning to slip. For a moment, she considered the possibility that she might not be able to complete the climb, but then she heard Rodriguez's voice, weak but clear. "Keep going, Chen, you can do this." Despite his injuries and his semi-conscious state, Rodriguez was aware of what was happening and was trying to encourage her. His words gave Sarah the strength she needed to continue, and she resumed her climb with renewed determination. The ledge system proved to be more complex than it had appeared from below. Sarah had to navigate several difficult sections where the rock was loose and the handholds were minimal. With Rodriguez's weight on her back, she had to be incredibly careful with each movement, knowing that a single mistake could result in a fatal fall for both of them. As she worked her way along the ledge, Sarah could see that her plan was working. The enemy positions were below her now, and she was approaching a section of the canyon where the walls were less steep and the climbing would be easier. More importantly, she could see the extraction point in the distance, a small clearing where helicopters could land once the weather cleared. The final section of the climb was the most technically difficult. Sarah had to negotiate a narrow chimney in the rock that barely provided enough space for her small frame, let alone Rodriguez's additional bulk. She had to carefully maneuver both of them through the confined space, using her legs to push against one wall while pulling with her arms against the other. When she finally reached the top of the canyon wall, Sarah was exhausted beyond anything she had ever experienced. Every muscle in her body ached, her hands were bleeding from the rough rock, and she was struggling to catch her breath in the thin mountain air. But she had done it. She had carried Rodriguez to safety through terrain that would have challenged an experienced rock climber without any additional weight. Below her, the rest of the squad was fighting their way out of the ambush using the distraction that her climb had created. Kim had taken charge of the tactical situation and was leading the other soldiers through an alternate route that would allow them to rejoin Sarah at the extraction point. The enemy forces, confused by Sarah's unexpected maneuver, were being outflanked and would soon be forced to withdraw. But Sarah's mission wasn't complete yet. She still had to get Rodriguez to the extraction point, and she had to ensure that the rest of her squad made it to safety. The small soldier who had been told she was too weak for military service was about to complete one of the most remarkable rescues in military history. Reaching the top of the canyon wall was only the beginning of Sarah's final push to save Rodriguez's life. The extraction point was still over a mile away, and she could see that the terrain ahead was a mixture of open ground and rocky outcroppings that would provide some cover, but also expose them to potential enemy observation. Rodriguez was still unconscious, and his breathing was becoming more labored with each passing minute. Sarah quickly assessed their situation. The climb had taken nearly an hour, and she could hear the sounds of combat below as her squad mates fought their way through the enemy positions. The weather was beginning to clear, which meant that helicopter extraction might soon be possible. But it also meant that enemy forces would have better visibility and mobility. Time was running out, and Rodriguez's life hung in the balance. She adjusted the improvised harness system that had allowed her to carry Rodriguez during the climb, redistributing his weight in a way that would be more manageable for the final push to the extraction point. Her small frame was perfectly suited for this type of carry. She could get close to Rodriguez's center of gravity and use her legs and core strength to support his weight, while her natural balance and endurance allowed her to maintain a steady pace. The journey across the plateau above the canyon was surreal. Sarah was carrying a man who weighed nearly twice what she did, through terrain that would have been challenging for a single soldier, while enemy forces were potentially closing in on their position. But she moved with the confidence of someone who had already overcome the impossible and was determined to see her mission through to completion. As she walked, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the small-town girl who had been told she was too weak for military service to the combat veteran who was carrying her wounded squad leader to safety. Her transformation had been remarkable. But more than that, she had proven that strength came in many forms, and that determination could overcome any obstacle. About halfway to the extraction point, Sarah heard the distinctive sound of helicopters. In the distance, the weather was clearing enough to allow flight operations, and she could see 2 aircraft approaching their position. Her heart leaped with hope. If she could get Rodriguez to the extraction point, he might still survive his injuries. But the helicopters also meant that enemy forces would know exactly where they were headed. Sarah could see movement in the rocks ahead, and she realized that Taliban fighters were attempting to reach the extraction point before she could get there. The final phase of her mission was about to become a race against time, with Rodriguez's life as the prize. Sarah increased her pace, drawing on reserves of strength and endurance that she didn't know she possessed. The weight of Rodriguez's body seemed to disappear as adrenaline flooded her system, and she moved across the rocky terrain with the fluid grace of someone who had spent months training in similar conditions. Her small size allowed her to navigate obstacles that would have slowed down larger soldiers, and her determination was absolute. The extraction point was a small clearing surrounded by low hills that provided some natural protection from enemy fire. Sarah could see that the helicopters were beginning their approach, and she knew that she had only minutes to reach the landing zone. But she could also see enemy fighters moving through the rocks around the clearing, and she realized that the landing zone was about to become a battlefield. As Sarah approached the extraction point, she could hear the sounds of combat behind her. Her squad mates had fought their way out of the canyon and were pursuing the enemy forces that were trying to intercept her. The tactical situation was complex and dangerous, but Sarah's focus remained absolute. She was going to get Rodriguez to that helicopter, no matter what it took. The first helicopter touched down just as Sarah reached the edge of the clearing. The aircraft was a UH-60 Black Hawk configured for medical evacuation, and Sarah could see the crew chief and medic preparing to receive Rodriguez. But she could also see muzzle flashes from enemy positions around the clearing, and she knew that the landing zone was under fire. Sarah sprinted across the open ground with Rodriguez still secured to her back, her small frame making her a difficult target for the enemy fighters. Bullets snapped past her head, and she could hear the distinctive crack of a K-47 fire, but she never slowed down. She was focused entirely on reaching the helicopter and getting Rodriguez the medical attention he desperately needed. The helicopter crew was amazed by what they saw. A small female soldier was carrying a man nearly twice her size across a battlefield under fire, moving with the determination of someone who would not be stopped by anything. As Sarah reached the aircraft, the crew chief and medic immediately began working to get Rodriguez aboard, but they were also concerned about Sarah's condition. "Soldier, you need medical attention too," the medic shouted over the noise of the rotors. Sarah's hands were bleeding from the climb, her uniform was torn, and she was clearly exhausted beyond normal limits. But she waved off their concerns and helped secure Rodriguez for the flight to the hospital. As the helicopter lifted off, Sarah looked down at the clearing where she had completed her impossible mission. She could see her squad mates fighting their way through the enemy positions, and she knew that they would make it to safety. But more importantly, she could see Rodriguez being worked on by the flight medic, and she knew that he was going to survive. The small soldier who had been told she was too weak to carry a rifle had just carried a 200-pound man 3 miles through some of the most difficult terrain in the world, while under enemy fire, and had saved his life. It was a feat that would become legendary in military circles, and it would redefine what it meant to be strong. The medical evacuation flight to Bagram Airfield was a blur of activity as the flight medic worked to stabilize Rodriguez's condition. Sarah sat in the jump seat, watching the medical team work with the efficiency that characterized military medicine. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to believe that Rodriguez was going to survive, and the relief was overwhelming. The helicopter crew had been amazed by Sarah's story. The crew chief, a veteran of multiple deployments, had never seen anything like what she had accomplished. "In 20 years of flying these missions," he told her, "I've never seen a soldier carry another soldier that far under those conditions. What you did today was impossible, but you did it anyway." Sarah was too exhausted to fully process the magnitude of what she had accomplished. Her body ached from the physical demands of the carry, her hands were lacerated from the climb, and she was dehydrated from the exertion. But she was also filled with a sense of accomplishment that went beyond personal achievement. She had saved Rodriguez's life, and she had proven that the values of courage, determination, and never leaving a fallen comrade were more than just words. When the helicopter landed at Bagram, Rodriguez was immediately taken to the trauma center, where a team of surgeons was waiting to treat his injuries. Sarah was also taken to the medical facility, where doctors examined her condition and treated her various injuries. The medical staff was amazed by her physical condition. Despite carrying a 200-pound man for 3 miles, she was in remarkably good shape. News of Sarah's remarkable rescue spread quickly through the military community. Within hours, senior officers were visiting her hospital room, wanting to hear the story firsthand. The base commander, a colonel who had served in multiple combat zones, was particularly impressed by her leadership and courage under fire. "What you did today represents the very best of what it means to be a soldier," he told Sarah. "You demonstrated courage, leadership, and an absolute commitment to your fellow soldiers. This is the kind of action that defines military service and brings honor to our profession." The rest of Sarah's squad arrived at Bagram several hours later, having successfully fought their way out of the ambush and made it to an alternate extraction point. They were dirty, exhausted, and emotionally drained, but they were also filled with pride in what their smallest member had accomplished. Kim, Santos, and Turner visited Sarah in the hospital, and their reunion was emotional. "You saved his life," Turner told Sarah, his voice thick with emotion. "When I saw you start that climb with Rodriguez on your back, I thought you were crazy. But you did it. You actually did it." The other soldiers agreed, and they spent hours talking about the mission and what it meant to them as soldiers and as friends. Rodriguez's surgery was successful, and within a few days, he was stable enough to receive visitors. When Sarah walked into his hospital room, he was sitting up in bed, his leg in a cast but his spirits high. The reunion between the squad leader and the soldier who had saved his life was deeply moving. "I remember pieces of what happened," Rodriguez told Sarah. "I remember you telling me to hold on, and I remember the sound of your voice encouraging me during the climb. But most of all, I remember thinking that if anyone could get me out of there, it would be you. You're the strongest person I've ever served with, and I'm honored to have been your squad leader." Sarah's actions had a profound impact on the entire military community. Her story was reported in military publications, and she became a symbol of the courage and determination that defined the modern American soldier. But more importantly, she had changed the conversation about women in combat and what it meant to be physically strong. The small soldier who had been told she was too weak to carry a rifle had carried a 200-pound man 3 miles through enemy territory, climbed a canyon wall under fire, and saved a life through sheer determination. Her story challenged every stereotype about gender roles in the military and redefined what it meant to be a warrior. Sarah was awarded the Silver Star for her actions during the rescue, making her one of the youngest women ever to receive the award. The citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States while serving as a radio operator with the 10th Mountain Division in Afghanistan. Private First Class Chen's extraordinary heroism and selfless devotion to duty are in keeping with the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon herself, her unit, and the United States Army." But for Sarah, the awards and recognition were secondary to the knowledge that she had saved Rodriguez's life and upheld the values that had brought her to Afghanistan in the first place. She had proven that strength came in many forms and that courage could overcome any obstacle. When Sarah returned to the United States several months later, she was a different person than the small-town girl who had enlisted in the Army. She had become a combat veteran, a proven leader, and a symbol of what was possible when determination met opportunity. But she had also remained true to the values that had defined her from the beginning: courage, compassion, and an absolute refusal to give up. Today, Sarah Chen serves as a training instructor at the Army's Mountain Warfare School, where she teaches the next generation of soldiers the skills and values that saved Rodriguez's life. Her story continues to inspire soldiers around the world, proving that true strength comes not from the size of one's muscles, but from the size of one's heart, The woman who was told she was too weak to carry a rifle had carried something far more precious, the life of a fellow soldier, and the honor of the uniform she wore with such distinction. The impact of Sarah's heroic actions extended far beyond the mountains of Afghanistan. Her story became a turning point in the ongoing debate about women in combat roles, providing concrete evidence that courage and effectiveness in battle were not determined by physical size or gender, but by character, training, and determination. Military leaders around the world began to reconsider their policies and assumptions about female soldiers. General Patricia Mackenzie, the highest-ranking female officer in the Army at the time, visited Sarah during her recovery at Bagram. "Your actions have opened doors that may have remained closed for decades," she told Sarah. "You've shown that the measure of a soldier is not their physical dimensions, but their heart, their mind, and their willingness to sacrifice for others. This will change how we think about combat roles for women." The transformation in attitudes was particularly evident within Sarah's own unit. Soldiers who had initially been skeptical of women in combat roles found themselves reconsidering their positions. The 10th Mountain Division, known for its tough, no-nonsense culture, officially recognized Sarah as one of their most distinguished soldiers, and her photograph was displayed prominently in the unit's Hall of Honor. But perhaps the most significant change was in Sarah herself. The shy, uncertain recruit who had struggled to meet the physical standards of basic training had evolved into a confident, capable leader who commanded respect through her actions rather than her words. Her experience in Afghanistan had taught her that leadership was not about being the loudest or the strongest, but about being the one who stepped forward when others needed help. When Sarah returned to Fort Drum after her deployment, she was greeted as a hero. The base commander organized a ceremony to honor her actions, and hundreds of soldiers attended to show their respect. But Sarah was more interested in getting back to work than in receiving accolades. She had developed a passion for training and wanted to use her experiences to help prepare other soldiers for combat. The Army recognized Sarah's potential as an instructor and assigned her to the Mountain Warfare School, where she would teach the skills and techniques that had saved Rodriguez's life. The assignment was unusual for someone of her rank and experience, but her combat record and demonstrated expertise made her an ideal candidate for the position. At the Mountain Warfare School, Sarah found her true calling. She discovered that she had a natural ability to teach complex skills in a way that was both accessible and engaging. Her students, many of whom were initially skeptical of being taught by a small female soldier, quickly learned to respect her knowledge and experience. She had a unique ability to break down complex tactical problems into manageable components, and her emphasis on teamwork and mutual support resonated with soldiers from all backgrounds. One of Sarah's most innovative contributions to the training program was her emphasis on what she called adaptive strength, the idea that physical limitations could be overcome through creativity, technique, and determination. She developed training exercises that taught soldiers to use their individual strengths effectively while working as part of a team to overcome challenges that might be impossible for any single person. Sarah's classes on evacuation procedures and casualty care were particularly popular. She used her experience carrying Rodriguez to teach soldiers how to move wounded comrades through difficult terrain, emphasizing the importance of proper technique and mental preparation. Her students learned that successful evacuations required not just physical strength, but also tactical awareness, emotional resilience, and unwavering determination. The story of Sarah's rescue of Rodriguez became a case study that was taught in military academies around the world. Military historians analyzed her decision-making process, her leadership under extreme stress, and her innovative problem-solving approach. The rescue was seen as a perfect example of small unit leadership and the importance of never leaving a fallen comrade behind. Rodriguez, who had made a full recovery from his injuries, often visited Sarah's classes to share his perspective on the rescue. His presence added credibility to her instruction and helped students understand the real-world implications of the techniques they were learning. The bond between Sarah and Rodriguez had deepened into a lifelong friendship based on mutual respect and shared experience. "She saved my life," Rodriguez would tell each new class of students. "But more than that, she showed me what it really means to be a soldier. Size doesn't matter. Gender doesn't matter. What matters is your willingness to do whatever it takes to bring your teammates home safely." Sarah's influence extended beyond the military community. Her story was featured in numerous publications, and she became a sought-after speaker at events focused on leadership, determination, and overcoming obstacles. She used these opportunities to advocate for policies that would give all soldiers, regardless of gender, the chance to serve in roles that matched their abilities and interests. During one particularly memorable speaking engagement at a high school in her hometown, Sarah was asked by a young girl what advice she would give to someone who was told they were too small or too weak to pursue their dreams. Sarah's response was simple but profound. "Strength isn't about how much you can lift or how fast you can run. Strength is about how much you care about the people around you and how far you're willing to go to help them. If you have that kind of strength, you can accomplish anything." The impact of Sarah's story on military recruitment was significant. Young women who might never have considered military service were inspired by her example, and enlistment rates among female recruits increased dramatically. More importantly, the quality of recruits improved as young people were attracted to the idea of serving in an organization that valued courage and determination over physical size. Sarah's personal life also reflected her growth and maturity. She had developed close friendships with soldiers from all backgrounds, and her small apartment near Fort Drum became a gathering place for young soldiers who looked up to her as a mentor and role model. She took particular pride in helping other female soldiers navigate the challenges of military life and realize their own potential. The transformation from the uncertain recruit who had been told she was too weak for military service to the confident instructor who was shaping the next generation of soldiers was complete. Sarah Chen had not only proven herself as a warrior, but had also become a leader who would influence military culture for decades to come. 5 years after her heroic rescue of Rodriguez, Sarah Chen had become one of the most respected instructors in the Army's training system. Her reputation extended far beyond the mountain warfare school, and she was frequently called upon to develop new training programs and advise senior leadership on matters related to combat effectiveness and unit cohesion. The Army had undergone significant changes during those 5 years, many of which could be traced directly to the impact of Sarah's story. Policies regarding women in combat roles had been updated to reflect the reality that effectiveness in battle was determined by individual capability rather than gender. Physical fitness standards had been revised to emphasize functional strength and endurance rather than arbitrary benchmarks that might exclude capable soldiers. Sarah's influence on these policy changes was both direct and indirect. She had served on several committees that reviewed combat assignments and training standards, providing insights based on her unique experiences. But perhaps more importantly, her story had changed the way military leaders thought about capability and potential, leading to more inclusive and effective policies. The success of Sarah's training programs had not gone unnoticed by senior leadership. She had been promoted to staff sergeant and was being considered for advancement to senior, enlisted ranks that would give her even greater influence over military training and policy. Her combination of combat experience, teaching ability, and natural leadership made her an ideal candidate for increased responsibility. One of Sarah's most significant contributions to military training was her development of what became known as the Chen method of stress inoculation. Drawing on her experiences in Afghanistan, she created training scenarios that taught soldiers to perform complex tasks under extreme physical and emotional stress. The method emphasized the importance of mental preparation, team coordination, and adaptive problem-solving in situations where traditional approaches might fail. The Chen method was revolutionary because it focused on developing resilience rather than just physical capability. Sarah understood that the most critical moments in combat often required soldiers to perform beyond their normal limitations, and her training prepared them for exactly those situations. Students learned to function effectively when exhausted, injured, or facing seemingly impossible odds. Sarah's approach to leadership development was equally innovative. She believed that leadership was not a position but a mindset, and that every soldier had the potential to lead when circumstances required it. Her training scenarios deliberately placed junior soldiers in leadership positions, forcing them to make critical decisions and take responsibility for their teammates' safety. During one particularly challenging exercise, Sarah watched as a young private named Maria Gonzalez struggled to lead her team through a simulated casualty evacuation. Gonzalez was small in stature, much like Sarah had been, and was facing skepticism from some of her more experienced teammates. Sarah saw herself in the young soldier and provided the same kind of guidance and encouragement that Rodriguez had given her years earlier. Leadership isn't about being the biggest or the loudest, Sarah told Gonzalez during a break in the exercise. It's about caring more about your teammates' welfare than your own comfort. When you show that level of commitment, people will follow you anywhere. By the end of the exercise, Gonzalez had successfully led her team through the evacuation and had earned the respect of her peers. Sarah's reputation as a mentor and developer of young soldiers had become legendary throughout the Army. Officers would specifically request that their most promising soldiers attend her courses, knowing that they would return to their units as more capable and confident leaders. Sarah took particular pride in working with soldiers who faced challenges similar to those she had encountered, proving that limitations could be overcome through determination and proper training. The international military community had also taken notice of Sarah's innovations. She had been invited to present her training methods at conferences in allied nations, and several countries had adopted modified versions of the Chen method for their own forces. The techniques that had grown out of her experience carrying Rodriguez through the mountains of Afghanistan were now being used to train soldiers around the world. Rodriguez, who had been promoted to sergeant major and was serving in a senior training position himself, often collaborated with Sarah on curriculum development. Their professional relationship had evolved into a true partnership, with each bringing unique perspectives to the challenge of preparing soldiers for combat. Rodriguez's operational experience combined with Sarah's innovative teaching methods created training programs that were both realistic and effective. Working with Sarah has taught me that the best leaders are often found in the most unexpected packages, Rodriguez observed during a joint presentation to senior officers. She's shown us that if we look beyond our preconceptions and focus on character and capability, we can find extraordinary potential in people we might otherwise overlook. Sarah's personal growth had been as remarkable as her professional achievements. The shy, uncertain recruit had become a confident, articulate leader who commanded respect from soldiers at all levels. She had developed a clear sense of purpose and a deep understanding of her own capabilities and limitations. Most importantly, she had learned to see her size and gender not as obstacles to overcome, but as unique attributes that gave her advantages in certain situations. The recognition of Sarah's contributions came in many forms. She had received multiple awards for her service, including the Bronze Star for her training innovations and the Army Commendation Medal for her mentorship of young soldiers. But the recognition she valued most came from the soldiers she had trained, many of whom credited her with helping them discover their own potential. One of Sarah's former students, now a captain serving in Iraq, wrote to her, "The confidence you gave me to believe in myself saved my life and the lives of my soldiers during a complex operation. The techniques you taught me allowed me to lead my team through a situation that could have been disastrous. I can never thank you enough for showing me that leadership comes from the heart, not from rank or position. Sarah's influence on military culture extended beyond training and tactics. She had become a symbol of the changing nature of military service, representing the idea that effectiveness in combat was determined by character, skill, and determination rather than traditional stereotypes. Her story had inspired countless young people to consider military service and had helped create a more inclusive and effective military organization. As Sarah approached her 10th year of service, she was facing decisions about her future career path. Senior leaders had approached her about opportunities for commissioning as an officer, advanced education, and assignments to increasingly important positions. Whatever path she chose, it was clear that her influence on military training and culture would continue to grow. The ceremony held at Fort Drum on the 10th anniversary of Sarah's rescue of Rodriguez was a testament to the lasting impact of her heroic actions. Representatives from all branches of the military attended, along with foreign military observers, defense contractors, and government officials. But for Sarah, the most meaningful attendees were the hundreds of soldiers she had trained over the years, many of whom had traveled great distances to honor their former instructor. The keynote speaker was General Amanda Harrison, the Army Chief of Staff, who had specifically requested the opportunity to address the gathering. Staff Sergeant Chen's actions in Afghanistan represent the very best of American military values, she told the assembled crowd. But her contributions to our military extend far beyond that single act of heroism. She has fundamentally changed how we think about leadership, capability, and potential. The soldiers she has trained are serving with distinction around the world, carrying forward the lessons she has taught them. Sarah, now wearing the stripes of a staff sergeant and preparing for promotion to Sergeant First Class, listened to the speeches with a mixture of pride and humility. She was grateful for the recognition, but she was also aware that her story was just one example of the courage and dedication displayed by soldiers every day. The real heroes, she believed, were the thousands of men and women who served quietly and professionally without recognition or fanfare. During her own remarks at the ceremony, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from a small town in Oregon to this moment of recognition. 10 years ago, I was told I was too weak to be a soldier, she said. Today, I'm proud to say that I've helped train some of the strongest soldiers in the world. But strength, as I've learned, isn't about how much you can lift or how fast you can run. It's about how much you care about the people serving beside you, and how far you're willing to go to ensure they come home safely. Sarah's speech included a special tribute to Rodriguez, who was seated in the front row with his family. Sergeant Major Rodriguez didn't just save my career by believing in me when others didn't, she said. He taught me that leadership is about serving others, not being served by them. Every soldier I've trained has benefited from the lessons he taught me about courage, integrity, and selfless service. The ceremony also marked the official dedication of the Sarah Chen Leadership Development Center, a new facility at the Mountain Warfare School that would house advanced training programs based on her methods. The center would serve as a hub for developing the next generation of military leaders, with a focus on the adaptive leadership principles that Sarah had pioneered. But perhaps the most moving moment of the ceremony came when a group of Sarah's former students presented her with a special gift, a photograph montage showing soldiers from around the world who had been trained using her methods. The images showed men and women of all backgrounds and nationalities, united by their commitment to the principles of courage, teamwork, and selfless service that Sarah embodied. As Sarah looked at the photographs, she was struck by the diversity of the faces staring back at her. There were soldiers from urban backgrounds and rural communities, from wealthy families and poor ones, representing every ethnic group and both genders. What united them was not their appearance or their background, but their shared commitment to serving something larger than themselves. After the formal ceremony, Sarah spent hours talking with the soldiers who had come to honor her. She listened to their stories, learned about their experiences, and offered advice and encouragement. Many of them shared how her training had helped them in critical situations, validating her belief that the right preparation could make the difference between life and death in combat. One young soldier, Private First Class James Thompson, approached Sarah with tears in his eyes. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you personally," he said. "Last month in Afghanistan, my squad was pinned down by enemy fire and our squad leader was wounded. I remembered what you taught us about adaptive leadership and took charge of the situation. We all made it out safely, and I know it was because of the confidence you gave me to believe I could lead when it mattered." Stories like Thompson's were repeated throughout the evening, as soldier after soldier shared how Sarah's training had impacted their lives and their service. For Sarah, these personal testimonials were far more valuable than any formal recognition or award. They represented the true measure of her success, soldiers who were alive and effective because of the lessons she had taught them. As the evening wound down, Sarah found herself standing alone for a moment, looking out at the mountains surrounding Fort Drum. The peaks reminded her of Afghanistan and the moment that had changed her life forever. She thought about the journey from that desperate climb up a canyon wall to this moment of recognition and reflection. The small-town girl who had been told she was too weak for military service had become one of the most influential soldiers of her generation. She had saved lives, changed policies, and inspired countless others to pursue their own dreams despite the obstacles they faced. But perhaps most importantly, she had proven that true strength came from within, and that anyone with enough determination could overcome seemingly impossible challenges. Rodriguez approached her as she stood in contemplation. "Penny for your thoughts," he said with a smile. Sarah turned to her old squad leader and friend, grateful for his presence and his unwavering support over the years. "I was just thinking about how far we've all come," Sarah replied. 10 years ago, we were just trying to survive in those mountains. Now we're training the next generation of soldiers to be better than we ever were." Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "You know what I think?" he said. "I think that scared recruit who showed up at my squad all those years ago is still in there somewhere, still trying to prove she belongs. But what she doesn't realize is that she's already proven everything she needs to prove. She's shown the world that heroes come in all sizes, and that the biggest hearts often come in the smallest packages." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.